Welcome to The Stone Wolves, a Galactic Football League novella. Written by Scott Sigler and J.C. Hutchins. Performed by Scott Sigler. The Stone Wolves is also available as a Kindle ebook from Amazon.com or as a full-length audiobook from Audible.com. To find links for those items, go to scottsigler.com/thestonewolves, one word. Hello, junkies! I am here for The Stone Wolves episode number 13. I am still working away on GFL Book 7. It's over 79% done right now. It is a roller coaster ride heading towards the end of this thing, but using the roller coaster metaphor, I'm just about to tip over that highest point and then come screaming down to the finish at terminal velocity. And that's about all I have to tell you this week. I hope you are gearing up for the holidays, and I hope that no matter what's going on with family, with friends, lack of family, lack of friends, that you are planning on being good to yourself. I will say it again. Be good to yourself. It's the holidays. You deserve someone to be good to you, and you got to start with you being good to you. Be nice to yourself. Any other way you want to phrase it. Trust me on this one. It will help things out a lot. So let me get you caught up on the story so far, and then we're all going to go get blitzed on eggnog. Previously on The Stone Wolves, the Krakens won, which led Cillian and Beans into a celebratory drinking frenzy. The morning after, there is a price to be paid. Now, the crew of the Oleron must prepare for the dangerous jump into Creterakian space, also known as Bat Country. Chapter 11. Hangover. Cillian Carbonaro opened one eye. Doing so made his head hurt. Oh, high one. He'd over-celebrated, and his penance had only just begun. At least his cramped cabin was dark. He didn't remember coming back here and going to bed. Had he done so on his own power, or had Beans donned the schmeck suit and carried him here? No, Beans had been just as drunk. Cillian could tell this was going to be one beast of a hangover, but it was worth it. He'd watched his son's team win a second straight Galaxy Bowl. The news I had gathered at the last punch-out included reports of the terrorist attack on the Krakens team bus, the touchback. Was Quentin the target? If so, had Cillian's old enemies learned about the boy and decided that if they couldn't get the killer, they could get his son? Or had Quentin earned enemies of his own along the way? That did seem to be a Carbonaro tradition, and despite the changed last name, the boy was a Carbonaro. The team was owned by a gangster, after all. Maybe the bomb hadn't been meant for Quentin. Even if it had, there was nothing Cillian could do, not without the risk of actually drawing old enemies toward the boy. Quentin was on his own, as he'd been almost before he could walk. Threats aside, Cillian couldn't be more proud of his son. He was proud of every snap the boy took, every throw the boy made, every yard the boy gained. Watching Quentin win his first Galaxy Bowl had been magical. The second was something far greater. Quentin's physical dominance at the quarterback position was a given. He was a star among stars. For his second title, however, he'd taken on a different role. He'd played fullback. He'd blocked for his running back and his quarterback. He'd taken a hell of a beating and kept coming. On the last play, with a shucking broken collarbone, he'd filled in at linebacker, sacked Don Pine, and caused a game-closing fumble. Quentin Barnes had entered the GFL as an arrogant nationalite, a man spoiled by ridiculous physical gifts. In his 5-year run with the Krakens, the boy had changed. He'd grown as a person. He'd become the ultimate team player. He'd become selfless. Such a glorious transformation. A transformation Cillian had had nothing to do with. He'd watched it from afar. He'd been there for none of it. Hangovers came and went. The guilt never left. "Oh, high one," he said. "Can't I just let myself enjoy something pure for a few shucking minutes?" A rhetorical question to which he already knew the answer. Why should he ever enjoy anything? He had abandoned his family. He'd done so to save their lives, to save them from torture, from horrible deaths. Had it worked? He would never know for sure. Constance was dead. Quincy was dead. Even if Janine was still alive, Cillian knew she'd never want to see him. Janine had been the oldest, had borne the brunt of Cillian's rage issues, his uncontrollable temper. Janine had run away at 11 years old. She'd looked 17 years old and acted like she was even older than that, but still, 11 years old. Odds were that she, too, was dead. Only Quentin survived. Maybe Constance and Quincy had lived longer than they would have if Cillian hadn't stayed away or if he'd risked their lives by going back to get them. Cillian would never know. He'd had no choice. He told himself that every day, a dozen times a day. No choice. Because of Druge Thorn. A tiny, distant spark of rage bubbled up through the growing hangover. Cillian felt his subdermal tats flicker, felt the red rising. He reached down to the side of his bed, knowing that if he had returned to his cabin on his own power, he would have brought his cooler with him. Sure enough, there it was. He opened it, pulled out a bottle. Water dripped down on him. The cooler's ice had melted. He twisted off the cap, took a swig of the room temperature beer. Hair of the dog, right? Lights, 1/4. The cabin lights reduced the darkness. Even that dim bit of illumination drove through his eyes, danced a new Rodina shuffle on his brain. Cillian squinted one eye, took aim at a glass bowl on the floor a few feet away. He flicked the bottle cap. It landed inside with a satisfying clink. There were many bottle caps in the bowl. Too many, if he was being honest with himself. He was not in the mood to be honest with himself. What he was in the mood for was self-medication. Speaking of which, he knew all too well what would happen if he let that spark of rage smolder untended. He sat up, the movement adding a Texas two-step to the dance party going down in his head. He reached into his pants pocket, pulled out a small plastic bottle, half filled with blue pills. Nasdor. He was supposed to take 2. He thought about his wife's suicide, how she'd burned herself alive to protect her children from Thorn. He thought of his 9-year-old son hanging from a noose for the crime of stealing bread. He thought of his daughter, who had run away from home while he was gone. She'd never been heard from again. He thought of recoil. He thought of lulls. Cillian took 3 pills, washed them down with beer. The drugs might keep the red monster shackled, but they couldn't keep his own damn thoughts from turning on him, sinking their fangs into him, making him sick with regret. So many mistakes.
"Skipper, are you awake?"
Zan's voice on the speakerphone.
"We are punching out."
She seemed so loud. Had someone cranked the volume? I'm awake, thank you. He should be on the bridge for this, but the crew had handled many punches without him many times. For the same reason, he had to admit that they would handle this one without him. He stretched out an arm, pulled over his trash bin, just in case. Cillian closed his eyes. The Oleron and everything aboard it phased back into real space, a phenomenon some called the shimmer. Cillian felt his gore rising. It was 50-50 if he'd throw up. He'd punched in and out thousands of times over his various careers, yet still the shimmer made him queasy. Slowly, he opened one eye, making sure that reality looked real. It did.
"Punch out and Rieger 2 successful,"
Zan said.
"We are in normal space."
Cillian turned the beer bottle in his hands. And the data cube?
"I wiped it clean, but I left the tracker intact. We put it on a punch beacon and sent it back toward Neptune."
Smart. If the sisters or the Creterakians, or both, were still after the Oleron, they'd likely be searching the punch points within reach of Lopu. Neptune was obviously one of those spots. Detecting the data cube tracker there would slow down search efforts as the sisters or the bats looked around the Sol system. It wouldn't slow them down much, but in the game of running from enemies, every bit of found time mattered. How long till we punched it quith?
Perhaps an hour,
Zan said. Cillian rubbed at his temples. What's the point of a double punch drive if we can't go right now?
Because repeated double punches put strains on the ship,
Zan said, loudly. I'm well aware of the strain, Zan.
Then you are also aware we need to run multiple systems checks to prepare for the next one. If you want to leave sooner, then I suggest you come to the bridge and help.
Zan was the XO, yet more often than not, she gave the orders. Maybe because Cillian was drunk more often than not. He didn't want to leave his cabin. Seeing Quentin attain such heights, knowing that it was yet one more moment Cillian couldn't experience with his son, it was too much. But he was the captain. He had duties. I'll be right there. Aya knew she was smart. Next level smart. The 1% of the 1% smart. As smart as she was, though, the math of punch space was way, way beyond her cognitive abilities. Some said you needed to be simultaneously smarter than a god and madder than a hatter, that processing how the punch space actually worked required one to have a brain that could process certain streams of thought that sane people couldn't even conceptualize. Could she program a punch drive route? Sure, it wasn't easy, but she could do it. As well as Zan could? No, but in a pinch, Aya could do the calcs to get from one gravity well to the next. Some describe the phenomenon of punch space as being, quote, a speck or three outside of reality, end quote, which, not coincidentally, was a song by the 26th century blood folk band Harvest of Tentacles and was covered a century later by Trench Warfare, giving the latter band their first ever #1 song, but it was one of the few T-dub tracks Aya didn't like. At the surface level, the concept was straightforward enough. Every mass in the universe warped the space-time around it. The bigger the mass, the bigger the warping effect. A planetary mass within certain size tolerances, not too big, not too small, had a certain warping impact, what some brainy types described as a resonant frequency. If two such Goldilocks masses were within a certain range of each other, punch technology could create a space-time channel between them, not all that different from, say, jamming each end of a giant straw into a giant peach, if the peach pit were the mass and the peach flesh were a huge area of space around the mass. Punch engines surrounded ships with a kind of bubble that moves through this fabricated space-time connection. In effect, the bubble passes through the straw at speeds that day-to-day physics established were completely and utterly impossible. What was weird was that somehow the bubble moved through space and time at that wacky fast speed, but the ship wasn't moving at all. The space around it was. The bubble could burst within the fleshy area, and when it did, the ship blinked back into relativistic space, appearing as if it had been there all along. No brain-splattering inertia added by the impossible journey. Whatever speed the ship was traveling when it entered punch space, that was the speed the ship was traveling when it came out of punch space. The bubble's burst gave off a corresponding burst of energy that was impossible to hide or even mitigate. An impossibility that was still impossible, unlike the old-timey impossibility of faster-than-light travel, which was so possible it was a normal part of everyday life. When you came out of punch space, sentience knew you were there. There was no way around it. And that was why Aya was at Zan's station on the bridge, realizing she hadn't considered all the angles, trying to better understand exactly what she'd gotten herself into. But Big Rock is in bad country, Aya said. As soon as we punch out, the bats will know we're there, right? Zan had swapped out the stuffed yellow elephant for an orange plush skyhopper, a herd animal on Gas Giants. While the real-life animals were hideous, a kind of floating jellyfish with teeth, Aya thought the toy version was actually kind of cute.
Of course they will detect a ship bursting out of punch space,
Zan said, her skyhopper head looking down at her nav interface.
That is a stupid question coming from one with your level of intelligence.
Aya felt her face flush, partially from embarrassment, partially from anger. Did Zan always have to be such a jerk? You guys have done this smuggling thing for years. I haven't, Aya said. If my life is on the line, then I expect you to have the common courtesy to answer a few questions. The skyhopper head looked up, turned toward Aya. Aya didn't know if Zan did that purely as an affectation, or if she somehow connected her optics to the googly eyes of each stuffed animal.
I see you have some backbone after all,
Zan said.
I will answer your question, but do not assume that this will become a habit. I expect you to ask, listen, learn, and not ask the same question twice.
Such a jerk. Aya nodded.
The data cube Fanaka provided contains a pair of Imperial IFF codes for small freighters.
Zan said.
We will be using one of those when we punch in. If all goes well, the Creterakians will not give us a second glance as we go on our way.
IFF. Identify friend or foe. Aya should have been the one analyzing the info on the data cube, but Zan had taken that responsibility away from her. Aya couldn't really complain about that. She'd missed the tracker, which had almost got everyone killed. What if they do give us a second glance? What if they come after us?
Then it would not be the first time we have fled from the authorities,
Zan said.
Besides the twin punch drive, the Oleron has some special abilities you have not yet been told about. We have 3 ways of avoiding conflict. The first is that the Oleron's acceleration rate is higher than any ship of our class and most ships in general. Aside from military craft specifically designed for rapid assault, we can outrun almost anything. System police vessels included.
Aya had known the ship was fast, but that fast? Impressive. That's a pretty big advantage, she said. How did the Oleron wind up with impulse engines that good?
Beans and I collaborated on the design. While I am nowhere near his equal, once upon a time I was an engineer of significant accomplishments.
Apex, Aya said. What kind of engineering accomplishments? The orange skyhopper stared out, emotionless.
The second conflict avoidance method is my ability to electronically make the Oleron look like other registered vessels.
Zan said.
Even in the most out-of-the-way places in the galaxy, there is still regular ship traffic. If we keep our distance and broadcast the false ID, we blend in with that traffic, and rarely does anyone pay attention to us.
Aya nodded, decided not to mention the fact that Zan had completely ignored her question. Whatever Zan's past, something real bad had happened. With something she designed as an engineer? It didn't matter. Aya knew Zan wouldn't accept her no matter what. The weirdo hiding in Hold 2 didn't want to share her story? She didn't trust Aya? Fine. Whatever. I've seen you do the fake ID thing, Aya said. What's the third technique? The orange skyhopper again looked down at the nav interface. Mismatched schmeck hands went back to work.
The third method is the least preferable,
Zan said.
Skipper calls it going cold. Beans invented an absorption coating that covers the hull. Any wave that hits the Oleron does not bounce off. By going cold, we have the ability to be nearly undetectable.
Well, now Zan was just making things up. But we've been detected plenty of times, Aya said. I know the ship shows up on radar, LiDAR, and everything else.
The ship does not show up, but the retractable plates around the ship do. Beans and I engineered a thin exoskeleton that quickly tucks away into recessed housings. When we are pretending to be another ship, or even being the actual Oleron on a registered flight, we want to show up on ship detection systems because we want to look normal. In certain instances, however, we want to be as hidden as possible. We retract the plates at the right time. If luck holds, we remain undetected. The Oleron is not invisible. We can still be seen with naked eyes or any optics, but we give off little reflection to electromagnetic transmitters.
Military-grade stuff, and advanced militaries at that. I wondered if there was any other Donkey-class ship out there with this kind of tech. Radiation-absorbing material, Aya said. Fancy, but the ship is still emitting radiation from any electronics, even shielded ones, or from thrusters, or just basic heat from our systems and our bodies. A long metal finger moved an icon from left to right.
That is why Skipper calls it going cold,
Zan said.
We shut down all systems, power plant, drives, life support, everything.
I stared, wondering if it was a joke. Life support? You cut off life support?
Hold 4 has enough air to last just over a standard day,
Zan said.
But we would freeze to death before that air is used up. Hold 4 is double insulated, enough to hide our body heat. From the outside, the ship will be the same temperature as the space around it, giving off no thermal radiation. Within 12 hours, however, Hold 4 will reach that same exterior temperature. As all of our power is shut off, the ship cannot flee. Where we go cold, we stay until those searching for us leave, or we have no choice left but to activate systems and fight our way free.
Going cold. That's what Aya's insides were doing. A starship with no power, just drifting, while its occupants slowly froze to death? But we'd wear exosuits, Aya said. Right?
The skipper does not believe in them for this purpose. Every suit has electronics of one form or another. Every single use of electronics, even an air processor, cycling on to clear out CO2, could emit a signal that might leak out, revealing our location.
No suits? This was madness. Then how the hell do we stay warm?
Blankets,
Zan said. Sheer Vicuna Apex madness. Have you gone cold before?
Twice,
Zan said.
And as we are still here having this conversation, you see that it worked. We were fortunate. I certainly hope we do not have to do it again. Now, Aya, return to your station and to your duties. Plotting our course is no small matter, and I must concentrate.
Aya nodded, mumbled a thanks, and shuffled off to her calm skins. Her ability to plan intricately complex ops flourished when she was planning for other people, almost as if it were a game. The people were pieces, and she needed to find the best possible strategy. When it came to herself, though, she had blind spots. Big ones. She'd always wanted to get better at that. Apparently, she had not. As the old saying went, more often than not, she didn't know what she didn't know. Next time a vote came up, she needed to ask more questions before she cast her ballot. A lot more questions. Sitting in his command chair, Cillian glanced around, appreciating the dim, dinged, dingy space. Maybe the bridge needed new overhead lights and a new coat of paint. And most definitely, some air freshener. But it was his. No, not his, really. Aya at her comm-skins. Beans working on the punch drives. Zan physically in her quarters, her schmeck at the nav station. The Oleron was all of theirs. It was home. Home. That word was a joke. What had happened to the home of his wife and children? Druge Thorn. That's what happened. Cillian shook off the thought. No time for that now. Fanaka Tolvaj stood near his chair, silently watching the crew work. Her watchbots scurried about the bridge, inspecting computer consoles and cataloging maintenance terminals. It spotted one of Beans' wall holes and scurried inside it. "No way, Fanaka," Cillian said. "Get that thing back here." "Oh, come on, killer. Peaches is curious." "I don't care. You promised it would stay with you. I don't want that machine running around my ship unsupervised." Fanaka frowned, as if hurt. "Still don't trust me? Very well." She uttered a command in the key language, and the spider-like bot crawled back out of the hole. It scurried up her sleeve, perched on her shoulder. Cillian toggled the switch on his armrest, activating the in-ship comm. "Beans, how's it coming?"
Punch drive 2 is purring like a Chechena saber cat,
came the reply.
"I need another hour to complete my analysis. Then I need 20 minutes to suit up and go exo to check the underside damage we suffered at Uzo Men."
High one. Cillian had forgotten about that. "I need it done faster," he said. "Can you keep working on the drive and remote pilot your schmeck outside to check the damage?" Beans loved to be inside his schmecks. Loved to pretend he was big and bad, but he could also operate his schmecks remotely. It was another of the Sklorno's many gifts. He could operate damn near any machine from a distance. All he needed was access to the machine's CPU.
"If I go remote, I can do it in 15 minutes,
Beans said. The little Sklorno had partied just as hard as Cillian had, but seemed to show no ill effects, no sign of a hangover. He rarely did, a condition that Cillian envied. "Beans, there is a bonus bottle of junkie gin if you get it done in 10.
"Good Goldman! I'm on it, Skipper."
Cillian rose, moved to Zan's station. Her walking schmeck stood there, metal hands adjusting various controls, a star chart displayed in her holotank. Her orange skyhopper head bothered him. Nothing could make that animal look cute, not even plush orange fur.
"We are on schedule,"
Schmeck Zan said.
"I have been studying our options while you were sleeping. And before you were sleeping, while you and the others watched that silly athletic contest."
That was Zan. Never missed a chance to chide someone for doing something other than work. "Back in Bat Country," Cillian said. "Been a while since we've done that. Dangerous stuff." Zan said nothing. That was also like her. When someone said something so blatantly obvious, she rarely reacted. "It's not that dangerous," Fanaka said. "The data cube had 2 IFF codes for Imperial freighters. I assume this crew is competent enough to use one of those codes correctly?" Did Fanaka really think that little bit of subterfuge meant the mission wasn't dangerous? "You're living in the past," Cillian said. "My crew isn't the Krazatu, and the Oleron isn't a warship. If your codes don't check out, we're going to be in a world of trouble. And that doesn't even count the fact that even if they do work out, we have to break in to an Imperial prison." Fanaka waved a hand, as if Cillian fearing bat forces deep in Creterakian space was akin to being scared of his own shadow. But he wasn't overreacting. 6 Isaacs, possibly more. Exact types unknown, but all Isaacs were small, fast, nimble dealers of death. A cargo ship's nightmare. And there was the possibility of warships nearby. Corvettes, frigates, maybe even a damn destroyer. Even worse, the borehole was in the quiescence, which meant the only way to detect the Isaacs or a possible warship was by visual alone. The Oloran wouldn't know if a warship was in range until they saw it, at which point said crew's collective goose was as good as cooked. "We have to assume the IFF code is bad," Cillian said. "We need a backup false identifier."
I am working on one,
Zan said.
The borehole's core computing system is a Nemric. I have encountered those before. Sometimes I have fooled them, sometimes not.
Aya looked up from her station. "Did you say a Nemric?" She asked the question tentatively, with a soft voice that wasn't normal for her. Aya was in Zan's doghouse, and she knew it. Generating false ship IDs and go signals was Aya's job in the first place. The fact that Zan was doing it instead showed how angry she was with Aya's tracker screw-up.
Yes, I did say Nemric,
Schmeck Zan said.
You heard me just fine, Aya. If you are going to speak up, do so with more confidence, or do not speak up at all. According to the Datacube's information, the borehole's control system is a Nemric, the Yinnerton variant, installed about 20 years ago.
Aya smiled. "Then we might be in luck. When I was in the..." She trailed off, glanced at Fanaka, then looked back to the orange skyhopper. "When I was in my old job, I trained on a Nemric suite for a long time." Aya hadn't told the crew about her past. When she was ready, she would. But Cillian had served with thousands of sentients, and he didn't need to see Aya's service record to make an educated guess about her expertise. Comms, of course, but wrapped up in signals intelligence work and ops planning. High-level stuff. The League didn't send death squads into foreign territory unless the target was of high value or knew too much. Aya was the latter. "Our lucky day," Fanaka said. "Zan, can Aya look at the data to see what's what? Maybe she can help us find a way in." Aya bit her lip, waiting. The young woman wanted so badly to prove herself. Cillian wanted her in the crew permanently, but if Zan didn't approve, Aya would be out. That was the deal.
Of course,
Zan said.
But I will double-check all of your work, Aya, so do not cut corners. And I had better see notes, meticulous notes.
Aya smiled and nodded. "You got it, your navigatoress." Beans' shrill voice ripped across the speaker film.
"Ready to punch to quit. Give me that bottle, Skipper."
Cillian looked at the time readout on the main holotank. "The deal was 10 minutes, Cillian said. "You did it in 10 minutes and 14 seconds. Sorry." The speaker film emitted a long string of Sklorno curses. Cillian understood none of it. "Wow," Fanaka said. "I haven't heard a mouth that filthy since Lulz was recovering in the Dranook Mountains." Cillian returned to his command chair. "Zan, coordinates locked?"
Yes, Skipper.
"Let's get this show on the road," he said, and pulled his bucket from under his command chair. "Take us there." You have been listening to The Stone Wolves, a GFL novella, written by Scott Sigler and JC Hutchins, performed by Scott Sigler. Follow Scott on Twitter and at Instagram, where he is at Scott Sigler, and on Facebook at facebook.com/Scott Sigler. The Stone Wolves was directed by A. Sigler, engineered by Steve Riekeberg. Copyright 2021 Empty Set Entertainment. Theme music is the song Battle Cry by the band Superweapon.